I'll make you CEO if you translate this from Chinese, right here, in front of everyone.
The voice of Mr. Richard Wallace echoed through the grand ballroom in New York City as he lifted a contract written in Chinese. Laughter erupted like thunder. Every chuckle was aimed at Emily Sanders, the cleaning woman holding a tray with trembling hands. Emily felt the ground open beneath her feet. She had never been the center of attention, especially not in a room filled with elegant suits and sparkling jewelry. Her gray uniform felt like a mark of shame among the evening gowns and crystal glasses. That public humiliation left her no escape. She had to respond. Mr. Wallace smiled with arrogance, certain she would stay silent, that she would sink under the taunts. But Emily, breathing unevenly, her eyes fixed on the paper, took a deep breath. What began as a cruel joke was turning into a battle no one would forget. The clinking of glasses and the shimmer of dresses filled the ballroom when a deep laugh sliced through the air like a whip. Dressed impeccably, his white hair slicked back, Mr. Richard Wallace struck the marble table with his knuckles. The executives laughed with him, obedient echoes following his lead. In front of them all, Emily Sanders stood motionless, her uniform still smelling faintly of cheap soap. Her hands were clasped, fingers trembling, eyes lowered. She had entered only to collect empty glasses, but now she was trapped under the cruel spotlight of ridicule. "Look at this," Mr. Wallace's deep voice thundered as he raised the contract. "Take a good look at this woman. Tonight, she'll have the chance to shine, if she can read more than detergent labels." A roar of laughter spread across the table. Daniel Brooks, one of the executives, banged his glass against the tablecloth, nearly choking from laughter. Sophia Wallace, however, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding her father's gaze. Emily pressed her lips together. She wanted to disappear, to sink beneath the polished floor, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Her breathing grew shallow, as if every burst of laughter stole another piece of her air. Mr. Wallace leaned toward her with a venomous smile. "Come on, woman, prove you're good for something more than scrubbing floors. Translate the contract right here, from Chinese into English. If you succeed, I'll make you the CEO of my company." Silence fell instantly, followed by another wave of laughter. The idea was so absurd the guests treated it as the perfect joke. Laura Hill, another employee serving drinks, tried to step closer, but Emily subtly raised a hand, asking her not to intervene. Her pride was wounded, but she was still standing. She lifted her head, her tired dark eyes meeting Mr. Wallace's. "What if I try?" she whispered in a trembling voice. The laughter grew louder. Daniel nearly doubled over, while Mr. Jonathan Price adjusted his glasses with a mocking smirk. Mr. Wallace, enjoying the spectacle, dropped the contract in front of her. The thud of the paper on the table sounded like a final challenge. "Go ahead, surprise us, if you can." Emily reached out hesitantly. The document was heavy, filled with dense paragraphs and words that looked like mazes. Her pulse trembled, but her eyes began to move along the lines as if awakening an old memory. The guests' murmurs faded. The woman everyone thought couldn't string together two words in English was about to speak. Her chest rose and fell as she fought against her fear until Mr. Wallace's firm voice broke the silence. "Come on, woman, start already, or you'll look like the useless one we all think you are." Emily took a deep breath. Her throat was dry, but the Chinese words were beginning to take shape in her mind, as if they had been asleep somewhere deep inside her past. The ballroom held its breath. If this story has touched your heart, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and don't forget to like the video to keep supporting us. The contract lay on the table like a cursed object, thick, stamped, more a trap than a document. Everyone stared at it with morbid curiosity, waiting for the cleaning lady to fall into the greatest humiliation of her life. Mr. Richard Wallace leaned back in his chair, arms crossed with the air of a satisfied emperor. His eyes gleamed with malice, certain this scene would be remembered as his most unforgettable joke. "Let it be clear to everyone," he said, lifting his chin, "if this woman manages to translate every line of this Chinese contract, right here, I'll name her CEO of Wallace International Group." Cruel laughter erupted again. Daniel Brooks applauded as if the millionaire had told the best joke of the night. Some guests even hit the table between fits of laughter. Sophia Wallace, however, frowned, discomfort written across her face, but she didn't dare confront her father. Emily Sanders remained standing, her fingers pressed against the pages of the contract, feeling the heat of all those stares. Every laugh was a thorn driven deeper into her chest. From the corner, Laura Hill tried to catch her eye, to give her strength, but Emily didn't look up. She knew that showing weakness would destroy her. Mr. Wallace pressed on, leaning closer. "Do you accept my challenge, or would you rather go back to your mops?" Emily swallowed hard. Her throat was dry, but her lips moved with a courage that even surprised her. "I accept." Silence fell abruptly, so thick that the ticking of a distant clock could be heard. The guests stopped laughing, some leaned forward, curious. Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief, unable to accept that the woman had dared to agree. Mr. Wallace raised an eyebrow, his grin widened, confident that the show was about to get even better. "Perfect, then start right now." He shoved the contract toward her roughly, and the pages scattered across the table. Emily inhaled deeply, trying to steady her trembling hands. Each word written in Chinese seemed like an impossible wall, yet deep in her memory, an echo of youth flickered, a forgotten spark. She remembered her years of study, the nights spent translating texts when she still dreamed of a different future. She couldn't fail. Not this time. The murmur of the guests rose again like a wave. Mr. Jonathan Price, with a skeptical tone, muttered, "This should be interesting." Emily brushed her fingers along the edge of the contract. The paper felt as if it were burning in her hands, yet her lips began to form the first words in Chinese. The guests leaned forward eagerly, ready to hear the stumble, the confusion, the embarrassment that would confirm what they all believed. But just as she opened her mouth, Mr. Richard Wallace lifted his glass and ordered mockingly, "Quiet, everyone. I want to hear every word of this masterpiece." The ballroom fell silent, tension hanging in the air like a blade. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to speak. She held the contract with both hands, as if the paper might break at any second. Her fingers trembled so much that some guests thought she wouldn't even manage to say a single phrase. "Désaccord entre les parties," she said softly, her tongue stumbling only at the beginning. The first bursts of laughter erupted immediately. Daniel Brooks covered his mouth with his napkin, laughing so hard he could barely breathe, while a woman in a red dress whispered mockingly, "Poor thing, she can't even pronounce it." Emily pressed her lips together, inhaled deeply, and tried again, this time, with more determination. "Désaccord entre les parties est valide et obligatoire." The murmuring quieted a little. Mr. Price raised his eyebrows. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but it was clear, understandable, and surprisingly precise for someone everyone thought had never studied a foreign language. Mr. Wallace pretended to be bored and said disdainfully, "Come on, woman, keep reading. We're just getting started." And Emily continued. The contract lay open on the table when her voice was heard again. "Le Susain accept les terms et conditions," she read, her voice still trembling slightly but gaining confidence. The guests, who had expected her to fail immediately, began exchanging glances of surprise. The laughter slowly faded, replaced by tense silence. Sophia Wallace leaned forward, eyes wide. She had never seen her father play with someone like that, let alone be challenged so calmly. In the corner, Laura Hill clenched the tray tightly in her hands. Her lips formed a barely audible whisper. "Stay strong, Emily. Stay strong." Suddenly, Emily lifted her eyes from the paper. She was no longer just reading, she was translating aloud, without hesitation. "This agreement between the parties is valid and binding. The undersigned accepts the terms and conditions." An icy silence fell over the room. The English words flowed naturally, something no one had expected. The humble cleaning woman was doing what even the executives feared most, actually understanding what the contract said. Daniel Brooks stopped laughing, the sound caught in his throat. Mr. Price leaned closer, squinting, trying to see if there was any mistake in her translation. Mr. Wallace, meanwhile, crossed his arms, forcing an arrogant smile. "That's just the basics," he said coldly. "Let's see how long your act lasts." Emily lowered her gaze again, but there was a hidden fire in her eyes. She remembered the nights she used to study in secret, dreaming of becoming a professional translator before life pushed her toward cleaning floors. Each word she spoke awakened that forgotten past, as if she were rescuing it from the dust of the years. The room was divided. Some still waited for her to stumble, but others began to feel uncomfortable for laughing too soon. Sophia muttered under her breath, barely realizing it. "Dad, I think you should stop this." But Mr. Wallace silenced her with a sharp wave of his hand. "Quiet, Sophia. It's just getting interesting." Emily raised her voice again. "Le manquement à ces conditions entraînera de poursuites devant la Cour internationale d'arbitrage de la Haye." Then she translated without hesitation. "Failure to comply will result in legal action before the International Court of Arbitration in The Hague." Mr. Price's eyes widened. That wasn't a simple phrase, it was complex legal terminology, and she had translated it flawlessly. A murmur spread through the hall. The weight of humiliation was beginning to shift shoulders. Mr. Wallace, still wearing his frozen smile, clenched his teeth behind his mask of arrogance. Emily took another breath, ready to continue, when something on the page caught her attention, a detail no one else had noticed. She ran her fingertip along the paper, making sure it wasn't a trick of the light. The Chinese letters arranged themselves clearly in her mind. Her voice, still slightly trembling, filled the room once more. "La société se réserve le droit de résilier le contrat unilatéralement." She paused briefly, lifted her head, and translated calmly. "The company reserves the right to terminate the contract unilaterally." A strange silence spread across the table. Several heads turned toward Mr. Wallace. That clause wasn't a mere technicality, it meant one side was clearly at a disadvantage. Mr. Price, who always prided himself on spotting every loophole, shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't expected a cleaning woman to analyze a contract so precisely. "That was luck," Daniel muttered, trying to lighten the tension. His laugh sounded forced, like a sour note. But Emily went on. "Le soussin renonce au droit d'appel sous la juridiction locale." And without hesitation, she translated, "The undersigned waives the right to appeal under local jurisdiction." The glasses on the table stood still, some guests began to lower their eyes, ashamed of having laughed only minutes earlier. Sophia stared at her father. Each new sentence was an invisible blow, cracking his arrogance, though he kept that rigid smile, a mask beginning to crumble. "Very well," Mr. Richard Wallace said in a harsher tone. "Continue. I want to hear more." Emily took a deep breath. She could feel every stare cutting into her like knives, but something within her had awakened. She was no longer just translating, she was exposing the true face of the contract. Each line was a trap, and she was laying it bare before everyone. In the corner, Laura couldn't help but smile. Her friend was not the invisible woman everyone thought she was. In that moment, Emily seemed taller, stronger, as if the gray uniform could no longer dim the dignity radiating from her. En cas de litige, la langue de l'arbitrage sera uniquement l'anglais. The translation flowed like a river. In case of dispute, the language of arbitration shall be English only. A restless murmur swept through the room. Some of the guests, foreign investors, understood immediately what that meant, a contract designed to leave defenseless anyone who didn't master the language. Mr. Wallace tapped his fingers irritably on the table. "Is that all you can do? Parrot what's written on the page." Emily looked up at him with a calm no one expected. "I'm not repeating," she said. "I'm explaining. This contract forces people to accept unfair terms without the right to defend themselves in their own language." Silence fell instantly, heavy and suffocating. The audacity of speaking to him like that was unthinkable. Sophia covered her mouth in shock. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, no one dared to laugh. For the first time, Mr. Wallace's laughter found no echo. The room had shifted from a cruel spectacle to an improvised public trial. His eyes hardened. He knew he was losing control of the situation. With venom in his voice, he launched his counterattack. "Very well, Miss Sanders. If you think you can handle everything, let's see how you deal with something truly complex." He leaned toward Mr. Jonathan Price, who opened another folder and placed a new page in front of Emily, a paragraph filled with dense legal jargon, a labyrinth meant to break her. The guests held their breath. The game was becoming crueler. Mr. Wallace slammed his palm against the table, the sound echoing like a verdict. Mr. Price, obedient and serious, slid toward her a new sheet crammed with small print, clauses, acronyms, and legal terms that even the guests couldn't fully understand. "If you really think you can," Mr. Wallace said with a twisted smile, "translate this. There are no simple phrases or basic formulas here. This is where the intelligent rise and the servants fail." An uneasy murmur spread among the crowd. Some shook their heads, admitting it had gone too far. Others, more loyal to the businessman, leaned forward eagerly, waiting to see her finally humiliated. Emily held the paper. The lines were a tangle of clauses, abbreviations, and legal phrases designed to confuse. The pressure tightened around her chest. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't let go of the document. Laura took a small step forward, wanting to intervene, but stopped when she saw the firm look in her friend's eyes. Emily didn't need saving. She needed to prove that even with fear, she could stand tall. Daniel Brooks let out a loud, mocking laugh. See? She's speechless. That's what happens when you pretend to be a lawyer. Emily looked straight at him. She said nothing, but her silence spoke louder than any words. She took another breath and looked back at the paper. The Chinese words swirled before her eyes like endless spirals. She remembered her college years, when professors used to say legal contracts were the hardest to translate, that not everyone could handle them. She also remembered those nights when her son slept beside her, while she studied under the dim light of an old lamp. Her voice came out at first uncertain, but firm at its core. Nonobstant les dispositions énoncées dans le présent document, l'actionnaire reconnaît irrevocablement la renonciation à, she swallowed and translated. Notwithstanding the provisions stated herein, the shareholder acknowledges irrevocably the waiver of. The silence thickened. No one dared to laugh. Sophia pressed her hand to her chest, deeply moved. Emily's tone was no longer that of a humiliated woman, but of someone who had carried too much pain in silence and had finally found a way to release it. Mr. Price frowned. He knew this wasn't coincidence. She truly understood what she was reading. But Mr. Wallace wouldn't yield. That's just the beginning, he said venomously. Keep going, if you can. Emily lowered her gaze and continued. Le droit de réclamer toute compensation ou indemnisation en casta, she paused briefly, closed her eyes, and translated. The right to claim any compensation or indemnification in case of. The voices of the audience went completely silent. The woman everyone had thought destined for humiliation was now standing tall, holding her dignity with every word. Daniel Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the mocking air had vanished from his face. Mr. Wallace gripped his glass so tightly the crystal creaked. He couldn't stand the thought that a woman he had considered invisible was demonstrating in front of everyone a knowledge he didn't possess. Emily lifted her head, breathing hard, but she didn't back down. This was no longer a translation, it was a battle of power before the entire room. And within that battle, a secret from her past began to stir, waiting for its moment to emerge. She lowered the paper slowly. Her breathing was uneven, as if each word had been a mountain she had to climb. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the faint clink of a misplaced glass. Every eye was on her, some filled with awe, others with shame, and some with disbelief. No one could deny what was clear. This woman had translated impossible passages with a clarity that shattered every trace of mockery. Mr. Wallace, however, refused to surrender. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, a crooked smile spreading across his lips. "Tell me the truth," he said in a low, harsh voice. "Who helped you? Who fed you those words?" Emily looked him straight in the eye. Her hands still trembled, but in her gaze there was no longer fear, only exhaustion and dignity. "No one helped me." Daniel let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, please," Daniel Brooks said between laughs. "Are we really supposed to believe a cleaning lady has a legal vocabulary in Chinese?" A few joined in, but the laughter was short and awkward. Most remained silent, waiting. Emily pressed her lips together, lowered her eyes for a moment, and then spoke in a steady voice. "I studied languages at Columbia University." The words fell like thunder. A murmur spread around the table. Sophia's eyes widened in shock, and even Mr. Jonathan Price took off his glasses as if to make sure he'd heard correctly. Mr. Richard Wallace let out a dry, venomous laugh. "University? You? And when exactly did you trade classrooms for a mop?" Emily swallowed hard. The question hurt, but there was no turning back. "I got pregnant at 19. My son needed food. I left school and took any job that would let me buy milk, medicine, and keep a roof over his head." A heavy silence filled the room. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, some lowered their heads. Suddenly, the woman they had deemed insignificant had a past filled with sacrifice and pain. Sophia murmured in a trembling voice, "That doesn't make her any less valuable, Dad." Mr. Wallace ignored her, his gaze slicing toward Emily like a knife. "So you gave up your career for a child, and now you think you belong at my table." Emily took a deep breath. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "I don't think anything. You challenged me to humiliate me, and now that I've proven I can do it, you're just looking for another excuse to crush me." The words hung in the air like a whip. Some guests nodded silently, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Wallace's arrogance was beginning to look less like power and more like cruelty. In the corner, Laura Hill felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to clap, shout, embrace her friend, but she held back. She knew the battle wasn't over yet. Mr. Wallace clenched his jaw, irritated by her defiance. "Very well, Miss Sanders. If you're so proud of your unfinished studies, you shouldn't have any problem translating what comes next." Mr. Price handed her another passage, even more complex, filled with indemnity clauses and nearly impossible terms. It was the final trap. Emily took the paper. Her hands were cold, but her eyes burned. She knew this wasn't just another test. This was her chance to reclaim, even for a moment, the dignity life had stolen from her. As she raised her voice, everyone held their breath. The paper crackled in her hands. The printed words looked like a labyrinth ready to devour her. The clauses were heavy with technical terms: force majeure, indemnification, arbitration clauses, liquidated damages. It was the kind of language even seasoned lawyers feared to translate incorrectly. Mr. Wallace leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked with feigned calm. "Go on, woman," he said with disdain. "This is where the fakes crumble." Mr. Price watched her with growing concern. He knew that paragraph wasn't a joke. It required a high level of precision, and if she got through it unscathed, the show would turn against his boss. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. Her breathing trembled, but she remembered those early mornings of her youth, reading legal texts in Chinese while her baby slept beside her. "Don't give up, Mom," a voice from the past seemed to whisper. She opened her eyes, drew in a breath, and began. "En cas de force majeure, aucune de parties n'est sera tenu responsable de tout manquement ou retard dans l'exécution." She paused briefly and translated clearly. "In the event of force majeure, neither party shall be liable for any failure or delay in performance." The entire hall froze. No one had expected such precision. She continued without hesitation. "Y compris, sans sy limiter, les catastrophes naturelles, la guerre ou les actions gouvernementales." And she immediately translated, "including but not limited to natural disasters, war, or governmental actions." The guests exchanged astonished looks. Some even nodded quietly, acknowledging that the translation was flawless. Sophia, holding back tears, whispered, "She's doing it." Laura pressed the tray against her chest, trembling with pride. Emily went on. "La partie en violation indemnisera l'autre partie pour tout dommage convenu dans ce document." Her voice trembled for a second, but she steadied herself. "The breaching party shall indemnify the other party for any liquidated damages agreed upon in this document." Mr. Price's eyes widened in disbelief. There was no mistake. Every word was in its place, with surgical precision. A murmur spread through the room. The audience was no longer laughing. Now they watched with a mix of shame and admiration. The mockery had turned into a public lesson. Mr. Wallace, rigid in his chair, slammed his fist on the table. "Enough," he thundered. But it was too late. Emily looked him straight in the eyes and said firmly, "This contract was designed to strip people of their rights. You knew it, and today, in front of everyone, you've been exposed." The words hit like a blade. No one dared to speak. The glasses were motionless, the silverware frozen in the air. Mr. Wallace's face turned red, his mask of superiority began to crack. Emily Sanders, who had endured humiliation with strength no one imagined, watched as Daniel Brooks, the eternal sycophant, sank into his seat, unable to meet his boss's eyes. Sophia Wallace rose slowly, her words were barely a whisper. "Dad, that's enough." The silence was so dense one could hear Emily's uneven breathing. She had achieved the impossible. There was no room left for doubt. What had begun as a cruel joke had become a trial of dignity. As everyone stared at Mr. Wallace, waiting for his reaction, He found himself trapped in the one place he had never imagined, public shame. The echo of Emily's last words still hung in the air like a sharp blade suspended over the lavish table. No one dared to move. It was as if the entire ballroom had frozen before a truth too heavy to hide. Mr. Richard Wallace sat rigid in his chair, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with contained rage. For decades, he had basked in the easy laughter of his guests, the automatic obedience of his employees, and the fear disguised as respect. But now, standing before a woman in a cleaning uniform, his power had shattered. Daniel Brooks was the first to look down. The lifelong sycophant no longer found anything funny. He wiped the sweat from the back of his neck, wishing he could disappear under the table. Sophia, her hands clasped tightly in front of her chest, took a step toward her father. Her voice trembled, but it was steady. "Dad, we all saw it. You can't deny it." Some guests nodded silently. Others avoided looking at him, afraid of his fury but unable to hide their discomfort. The humiliation was no longer Emily's, it was his. She stood tall, her breathing heavy. She didn't smile or celebrate. Her dark eyes glistened, not from triumph but from exhaustion. She had endured the laughter, carried the weight of every cruel chuckle, and yet she still stood there, unbroken. Laura Hill could no longer hold back. She stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "That's enough. She doesn't deserve this. No woman deserves to be humiliated like this." The silence deepened. For a moment, even Mr. Wallace's most loyal supporters seemed to hesitate. The businessman leaned forward, his hands pressed against the table. His voice came out hoarse, thick with anger. "Do you know who I am? I don't owe anyone an explanation." But the authority in his words had vanished. The ballroom no longer looked at him with admiration but with silent judgment, heavier than any shout. Mr. Jonathan Price cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Wallace," she translated it perfectly. "There's no way to dispute that." That statement was the final blow. A murmur spread through the room, the sound of arrogance collapsing. Some guests discreetly moved their glasses aside. Others pretended to chat, desperate not to be linked to the host's disgrace. Sophia took a deep breath and, for the first time, addressed Emily directly. "Miss Sanders, thank you for speaking the truth." Emily looked at her, surprised, unsure how to respond. No one had ever thanked her for something as simple as using her voice. Mr. Wallace slammed his fist on the table. "This is a circus," he roared, but his voice no longer carried authority. It sounded only like the outburst of a man who had lost control. Emily didn't back down. "You said you'd make me CEO if I managed to translate it, and I did." The words hit like a gunshot. The guests held their breath. Sophia turned to her father with a mix of sadness and defiance. "Keep your word, Dad." The silence became unbearable. Everyone stared at the businessman, waiting for his reaction. For the first time in his public life, Mr. Wallace was cornered, with no escape, and he knew it. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. The contract lying open on the table was no longer a symbol of mockery, but the witness of his humiliation. Emily Sanders stood upright, her forehead high, her hands still trembling but her gaze unwavering. She didn't need to raise her voice, the power of her dignity spoke louder than anything else. "Do what you promised," she repeated calmly. "You said that if I translated it, you'd make me director." A murmur rippled across the room. Some guests smiled nervously, others shifted in discomfort. No one had expected that mocking promise to come back to haunt him, until now. Mr. Wallace clenched his jaw, his fingers drummed frantically on the tablecloth. He wanted to laugh, to shout that it had all been a joke, but the eyes of dozens of witnesses held him captive. If he went back on his word, his reputation would collapse. Sophia took another step closer. "Father, we all heard you. If you don't follow through, you're not a man of your word." The blow struck right at the heart of his pride. The murmur grew louder. "Not a man of his word," some whispered. Mr. Price lowered his head. He knew that trying to make legal excuses would only make things worse. Emily didn't ask for anything more, didn't demand or beg. She simply stood there, waiting. Her silence was more powerful than any argument. Finally, Mr. Wallace stood. His chair screeched against the marble, the sound echoing like thunder through the hall. Slowly, he walked around the table until he stood face to face with her. He looked her up and down, his wounded pride burning in his expression. "Very well, Miss Sanders," he said in a rough voice. "If that's what you want, from this moment, you are the new CEO of Wallace International Group." The announcement hit the room like an explosion. The guests looked at each other in shock, some muttered in disbelief. Daniel's mouth fell open, speechless. The world they knew had just turned upside down. From the corner, Laura couldn't hold back a tear. Her friend, the same woman who had shared long, exhausting cleaning shifts, had achieved the impossible. Emily listened in silence. She didn't smile or celebrate. Her eyes remained fixed on the businessman's. "It's not what I want," she replied. "It's what you promised." Those words froze everyone. There was no arrogance in them, only justice. Sophia stepped forward and gently took her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Today you showed us what true courage looks like." One by one, the guests began to applaud. At first, hesitantly, then stronger, as if they were applauding not just a victory, but a lesson that both shamed and inspired them. Emily took a deep breath, letting that applause wash over her like a balm for countless invisible wounds. Mr. Wallace stood motionless, trapped in a scene he never imagined. He had lost his laughter, his control, and, most painfully, his power before everyone. In that applause, the balance of power was sealed and reversed. As the echoes filled the ballroom, one final gesture remained, something that would define not just the end of the night, but the fate of everyone present. Emily stood still, her hands trembling slightly, but her gaze serene. The echo of the applause lingered against the walls as the guests began to leave, murmuring about what they had just witnessed. Laura Hill approached and gently took her friend's arm. She said nothing, only looked at her with tearful eyes, as if knowing that any word would be too small for that night. Sophia stood nearby, watching her father with a mix of sadness and compassion. She had seen his arrogance crumble, seen the man she once thought invincible left speechless before the dignity of the very woman he had tried to destroy. Mr. Richard Wallace, however, did not move. The man who had seemed so imposing at the beginning of the evening now looked smaller, almost fragile. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth, his hands rigid on the surface. No one dared to speak to him. Emily took a deep breath. She wasn't seeking applause or titles. All she wanted was for that night to be remembered as proof that dignity is not something to be bargained with, that even silent pain can speak when given the chance. She crossed the hall with steady steps. Each one echoed against the marble floor, setting a rhythm no one present would ever forget. Before leaving, she turned her head one last time. Her eyes met Mr. Wallace's. There was no hatred, no resentment, only a silent truth that disarmed him more than any words could. The ballroom doors closed behind her, and the murmur of the night swept in like a breath of freedom. Outside, the lights of New York City shone indifferently, but for Emily, that dark sky glowed differently, the light of having regained what no one could ever take away from her. Inside, meanwhile, sat a millionaire surrounded by empty glasses and a silence that no longer served as his weapon, but as his punishment. That night was etched into the memory of everyone who had witnessed it. What began as a cruel mockery ended up revealing a deeper truth. Dignity does not depend on the uniform one wears, but on the courage with which one defends one's voice. Mr. Richard Wallace had believed he could humiliate a humble woman before a room full of luxury and power, but it was he who ended up stripped bare in his own arrogance. Emily Sanders, with her pure heart and quiet strength, had not only translated an impossible contract but also turned the pain of her life into a lesson of hope and redemption. Because true greatness is not found in money or titles, but in the ability to respect, to forgive, and to raise your head even when the whole world is laughing at you. If this story touched you, support our channel by clicking thanks or super thanks. It's the heart icon with the $sign beneath the video. If you don't see it, tap the 3 dots. Every contribution helps us create more stories and reach more people. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Tell us in the comments which moment moved you the most. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And before you go, check out the story on the left, it's sure to move you and make you think.